Welcome to a second week of developmental patterns. It's a very rich topic, and I felt like after doing 2 sessions last week, I didn't want to move on to the next principle. I wanted to stay with this one because there's 5 developmental patterns that I was exploring or kind of guiding last week, and this week we'll do some more of that really. There's a few things, very interesting things that I'd like to kind of tease out about them and just remind you, if you're not aware of this principle of the Bartenieff Fundamentals system, that they are patterns of organization or patterns of coordination. So not particular movements, but some specific movements clearly employ them in a very particularly clear way. And it can be useful to kind of recognize when we do movements that have that pattern in them, but that pattern can serve many other kinds of movement. And they are useful for coming into an awareness of how your coordination can be, how you can do the same movement with different kinds of coordination. And we can start to pay attention to more subtle choices of initiation and sequencing with them. I am particularly interested in the relationship this week between upper lower, body half, and cross-lateral. And if these are new words to you, don't worry, I'll go back. But the ways that these 3 interrelate. And I'd like us to play with them a little bit with a sense of traveling, with locomotion, which might not be so easy in the small space that you have, but that's the plan. And also for level change. So literally being on the floor and coming up to sit, sitting maybe up to standing. So using these patterns as ways of locomoting in space. So the 5 patterns that I will name are radial symmetry, which is a relationship of the core of the body, and we'll take that core as the belly button core, and we'll take it not at the surface of the skin, but between my 2 hands, like right in the center of this part of the core of the trunk. And the radial symmetry is this idea that from this central point, we have 6 limbs radiating, and that even though they're of different lengths, and I say 6, navel center to tailbone, very short, even though there are these different length spikes or spokes of the wheel, we can treat them with the same amount of value and initiation and differentiation. So I can think about using my spinal cord from navel center to head as a limb that is just as gestural as my arm, for example. Radial symmetry. You might also hear it referred to as core distal connectivity or navel radiation, which is slightly similar, but we can talk about that later. The next of our developmental patterns is head-tail connection. So skull, tailbone, and all the vertebrae in between, giving us access to rotation, to flexion, extension. Developmentally, we then have the arrival of, okay, I've got arms, I've got hands, and they can definitely be involved in my upper body, connecting with this limb of the spine, and the hands into the shoulder blades, into the spine. And the lower body, heels to sitting bones to pelvis. And then from this upper lower recognition of coordination, we have a finding of the right side and the left side, and those can work simultaneously. So it's an upper of one side joining with the upper of another side to have something more simultaneous. And then lastly, as we were finding last week if you were here, the complexity of all of those together for a cross-lateral connection through your body, which we have when we're walking. And so we come out of the womb and we explore all these different patterns of coordination and eventually find ourselves in this cross-lateral place. But we're constantly kind of going back and forth between them. And that's the bit I'd like us to explore today. All right. Please take a moment to stand up. If you weren't standing already, and this is hilarious because you just get my legs, so I'm gonna crouch so you can see me a little better. Take the arms nice and high, and just notice how lower body can bend, tailbone to heels, already in a little dance. Okay, I've got 2 feet and a tailbone, and they can already start a coordination of navel center relating to sole of foot, tailbone to belly. And as I stand, this lower body is the thing that can travel me in space, can support my weight. And we can use a connection of lower body to activate a little bit of weight sensing through a bit of pulsing, pushing, Standing through your feet. Little shake, bit of active weight, passive weight. Finding a bit of balance, if you like, on one foot. And you can find tailbone active, or pubic symphysis also active, if you like, directing yourself through space, through the bony landmarks of the tailbone or the heel. Lovely. And then finding hands to belly, giving your center a rub. And then finding, okay, arms, head. And go ahead and just mobilize the upper body a little bit, however you like. Feeling the air and the space around you. Whatever movements are calling to you that help engage the sense of head and eyes. And we can find a little pattern of going down to all fours, leading through the lower body first, and then the upper body takes over. And you can press through the upper body, and then the lower body takes over. Or you could start from the upper body leading, and then the lower body joining in. Lower body leading, pushing from the upper, playing a little bit with yourself with the lower body leading or the upper body leading as you make your way down to the floor and back up again with an upper lower organization. And then next time you're kind of at a low level to sitting, you can find what it is to go across the sitting bones into the lower body. Sitting, take a little bit of a shuffle around. If you can, if you're on carpet, this is going to be quite hard. But how is it to push a little bit through the lower body? And you could find one leg mobilizing and then the other leg mobilizing. Great, and then you can find upper body planted into ground. You might find weight being taken by the hands. How is it to push through the hands towards the feet? It might be a little early in the session for you to start a little jump, but if you'd like to, you can find a little bunny hop. Maybe that brings you back to 2 feet. And you can find a little hop with 2 feet. And then make your way to all fours. And we'll do this sensitizing of the right side and the left side. So you can find stabilizing on one side to wake up the arm and the leg of the other side in whatever movement you like. It's the sense of one side really active and one side more stable. Elbow and knee coming towards each other. And you can even find it with all points of contact on the ground and finding the side of the spine. Nice, and then the other side. Playing around with mobilizing that whole side. And you have this sort of similarity of hand and foot, lower leg, lower arm, knee, elbow, shoulder blade, side of pelvis, and the side of the spine. What's the possibility there for that side to explore the space around you and to work somehow together. Nice, great. And then please bring yourself onto your back. And we'll take a few X's and O's here. So finding a little bit more of the simultaneous relationship of these 6 limbs I was talking about earlier towards the navel center. So after having kind of warmed up and mobilized with a little bit more outer attention, let's bring our attention inwards. And right near the end of an exhale, go ahead, initiate at the navel center. And draw all 6 limbs in towards your navel center. And then from here, inhaling, spreading hands and feet, head and tail away from navel center. Can they all arrive back at the same time? And exhaling to the other side, head and tail relating to navel center, hands and feet coming with you. So not leaving any part of you behind. And using the flow of the breath to pour you onto your back surface. Refinding 6 limbs, spread far from belly button, and then drawing further in. And if you have space, how is it to open onto the front surface? And refind your way onto your back. And you might play with an image here of a jellyfish. That might help this become more fluid for you. And you can also explore opening onto your side. 6 limbs radiating away from navel center, using the side of your body for support, but not turning it into a body half action where you're really stabilizing through that lower side. Can you also find a reach through the underside leg and hand? And in your own way, finding this radial symmetry pattern, folding and opening your limbs. Head, tail, hands and feet, all of equal value. Keeping it at a pace that works for you. Doesn't need to be super quick. And if you haven't explored finding side and front surface, play with that a little bit. So it's arms just as active as legs, hands and feet, head and tailbone, having this relationship towards the navel center and spreading away. And then finding yourself on your back. Let's take a heel rock here. So this is the action of mobilizing the whole spine, initiating from the heels. So you've got this, if you're not sure what heel rock is, flexing and extending at the ankle joints, using the heel bone as your pivot to send a rock through the length of your spine. And if you normally have your legs quite wide for this, take them a little narrower. But if it takes a lot of muscular effort to keep your legs in parallel, they can flop to the side, it's fine. There are different ways of doing heel rock, and my interest for this one is that you come into an awareness of this vertical throughness of your body from heels to sitting bones, through the spine, through to the crown of the head. Sensing the 2 ends of your spine and all the motion in between. And you can take a pause from heel rock. Take a moment of stillness to sense your body. How do you sense your body in this moment? Where is clear in your awareness? Where is maybe less clear? And we'll begin heel rock again in a moment, and this time very much connecting to the end of the exhale, softening into the whole of the back surface with the ground, finding that yielding into gravity to then pick up this action from the heels. So the initiation might be more coordinated with breath. Can you let go in the jaw? So the head nods. Can you let go around the collarbones and the breastbone, the collarbones, the sternum, the breastbone, the ribs. Feeling the fluid content of the body supported by the ground. And then feel free to take some other kind of rocking, shaking, jiggling here, whatever you feel like your body wants. Remembering this theme in the Laban Bartenieff Movement System of exertion recuperation, and that recuperation can mean rest, but it can also mean doing something different to what you were just doing. So feel free to recuperate now in your own way. Take another few moments of recuperation and we'll meet back on our back in the big X. Okay, let's take this big X position and the X's and O's that we were just doing with a different coordination. So let's start with the hands and the head. Taking an arm circle with the hands to one side, and you can see your hands getting closer and closer and closer to you. Head also coming towards your navel center, rolling to the side with the upper body only so far as you can go before, okay, lower body wants to join in. And then sliding tailbone and heels towards you in a small ball. And then keeping the lower body very stable on the ground, opening the arms. Finding the skull on the floor, maybe finding the other shoulder blade on the floor. Seeing if this message can travel down the spine to send heels and tailbone back into this big expanded place. Finding an exhale, bringing hands and head towards you, close by, and then lower body carries on. Spreading upper body back onto the ground, and the message travels down the spine to send the heels and the tailbone along. So one arm has a longer journey over your head and the other one has a shorter journey, but can they both activate at the same time? So there's a slightly different timing of the arms, but they can feel like they work together. And of course, it's not just the arms, it's the shoulder blades and that long kinetic chain of the hands into the shoulder blades, into the collarbones, into the breastbone, into the ribs. Okay, and when you've done that right and left a few times, let's swap the coordination over. And so we start with the lower body. exhale and heels sliding on the floor. Knees bending, bringing your lower body close until the message is sent to the upper body to join in. And then keeping the upper body heavy on the ground, sending feet back along the ground. So there's a unspiraling through the thighs and an extending through the knees. Back of sacrum finds the ground, resisting with the upper body for as long as possible. And then shoulder blades refine the ground. Again, using this very gentle end of the exhale, finding the fluidity of the limbs, seeing if we can get close into these more postural muscles by relaxing as much as possible. And finding the extension of the legs from the flow of the inhale, allowing diaphragm to move the organs, sending the heels away, and then finding the upper body again. A couple more of those in your own timing, finding this slower, more breath connected, breath supported upper lower organization here. So there's a moment where you feel hopefully some sense of sort of spiraling through the spine as one of either the upper or the lower is leading and the other one is more passive. And this is a useful way of finding those parts of the spine that maybe don't have as much mobility, and seeing if by kind of re-coordinating this unfolding, you can invite some part of the vertebrae to have more pliancy or differentiation from the ones next to it. And when you bring your upper body in, don't forget to bend your elbows and make your hands come very close into your core. So you've got this arm circling overhead and also flexing at the elbows, getting small in the upper body. So there's a participation not only of the spine, but of the limbs. And if you were in a room with other people, I would be wandering around, tickling your feet to stimulate their kind of the extensor sort of thrust reflex through the feet. That if you tickle a baby's foot, they tend to kind of flex them. So you might think about that as if someone's tickling your feet to get that little flexion through the knees coming in. It's really hard to do it for yourself. And the next time you find yourself on your back, take a little recuperation, however you would like, after this investigation of upper-lower coordination. Okay. And now let's build on that by revisiting this body half connection. So we get to a simultaneity of the upper and the lower on one side. Place your hand on your navel center, give it another rub to remind you of this central organization we're playing with today. And you have now an image through your mind's eye of a line through your spine, separating the right side of the brain from the left side, the right eye and the left eye, right lung and left lung. Obviously gets a bit complicated with the organs of the belly because they're not symmetrical, but we have the kidneys a little further up, ovaries maybe, testes maybe, and then right leg, left leg, right arm, left arm, shoulder blades, side of pelvis, right ilia, left ilia. And we can, in our mind's eye, really relax the right side. And with the left side, find a condensing of that side of the spine, bending elbow and knee towards each other. And returning to the back surface. So we have the elbow and the knee bending, sliding on the floor. And they don't have to touch each other. It's more about activating the limbs into the proximal joints of the hips and the shoulder, with the whole side of the spine, head and tail, gently coming towards each other. And you can find that right side a few times if you like, before going to the left side. And your skull might turn in the direction of the folding limbs, or it might slide on the back of the ground. That's also possible. And you can also find it with the head turning to the opposite hand. So all three of those are possible here if you want to play with that, if body half is quite familiar to you as an action. If that's one layer of complexity that you'd rather not deal with, that's totally fine. Just do what you're doing and see what happens with this sense of one half condensing and the other half staying extended. And then at a certain point, allow the side that is flexing to keep flexing, to roll you onto your side so the other side can fold in as well. And then you can open the top side back onto the ground, and then you're back in your big X as you unfold the underside. So right side leads, left side follows, left side leads, right side follows. And maybe this feels familiar. This is how you were doing X's and O's in other times. Maybe it feels quite different to the upper-lower version we just did. And eventually, when you're lying on one side, you can press onto the underneath side to open top arm, to roll across your skull and your pelvis and close the book on top, and then open knee and elbow, upper arm and lower arm at the same time, rolling across back of sacrum and skull, and then closing on the other side. So more of a stable spine here, rolling across sacrum and skull. And you might feel that because the lower body might be slightly heavier, it wants to take over, but can you be quite strict with yourself to find a very clear side-sidedness, rather than it being lower leading, upper following, which is possible as well. So that's the thing, same body action, different coordination, different change of sensation and experience. Okay. Moving on from here, let's add a little level change. So I'm going to reach through my fingertips and feet to push myself to sit. One leg extended and one side flexed. And then I can come back onto that side, roll over, and find it on the other side, extending through the leg. And I can play around here with that body half, and then ease back into the ground. Come up to sit. And I can play with that limb. And then use the underside to get back onto the floor. So I'm finding when I get into this little small ball, I'm spoking my limb outwards, more to my right, and then finding a shift, a lateral pelvic shift across my pelvis to come to sit. And then I can find myself easing onto that other side to come down. I can also play with coming onto the forearm and the shin of the supporting side, seeing where that might take me. Shifting from one side to the other side. Seeing what's possible with this coordination of body half. Until eventually it might bring me out of the ground to find side crawl or potter about here. And then I'm going to leave it to you for a little moment to play with your side-sidedness that might have moments of becoming more upper lower. But see what you can find by paying attention to the simultaneity of the upper and the lower together. So right side, left side, differentiated, including the spine. So it's this head-tail connection underneath that might bring you to a new level, to a new base of support. And it might feel like there are clunky moments where your body just takes over and it's like, oh, where was I? That's fine. Take it at a pace that makes sense for you. And you might find it's helpful to go very slowly to be able to track the coordination. If this kind of free movement is appeared a little quickly, feel free to go back to some of the movements we've already done and refine them for yourself. We've got this X as an O pattern. And we've got this sideways shift to come to sitting. We've got some rolling across the spine. We've got some possibilities of different bases of support. And if you happen to put a cross-lateral connection in there, just because it happens, fine. It's totally fine. I'm trying to make the emphasis on these two patterns of body half and upper lower for now, and we will find more of the cross-lateral. Just so you can taste that sense of, oh, this is familiar, or this is pretty unfamiliar. I don't organize myself from here so often. Or, oh, that's quite useful for getting down to the ground maybe. Sense of body half to roll. And so if one side is more active, for example, the other side doesn't have to be entirely asleep. It can be more supporting. So that sense of core to periphery, this radial symmetry, is what helps re-include all the parts in the whole again. If you feel like one part is really taking over, remembering core through to all 6 limbs, underlying that action. And if you haven't found a way of getting out the ground to a sort of slightly higher mid-level, take 1 more minute to play with that. Coming up a little bit to sit. And if your eyes have been closed, you might want to just gently open them as you bring yourself up. Or if you're happy finding that with eyes closed, that's fine also. We'll move on to some cross-lateral connection work, but now is a good moment if anyone has any like burning questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise we'll come back to the big X, because that's where everything seems to come from at the moment for these developmental patterns.
What was that side pelvic shift? I didn't quite understand. It didn't feel like a pelvic shift, it was just a tipping of a pelvis.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tipping, but because your pelvis is traveling sideways in space, we can name it as a lateral pelvic shift. I'm on the side of my pelvis, and here I am as a little shift sideways as its orientation to gravity is making that level change. 1 sitting bone to 2 sitting bones. And then I could carry on with a lateral pelvic shift that might take me across myself, over myself. Cool, thank you. So for the next little bit of this, maybe it's useful that you see, first of all. So cross-lateral connection, we can explore as a combination of the lower and the upper and side-sidedness, and we're traveling across the spine. So we're going to first of all, maybe I do this. You can see more of my body. So if I find a heel rock in this big X position from my right foot through to my left hand, I can feel this conversation from the right lower traveling through to my left upper. We'll do that first, map those connections a little bit. And maybe they feel clearer after having differentiated things, if we've done this before. Not a problem if it's new. And then we'll find an initiation from one hand crossing over towards the foot. So I'm taking my limb quite close to my core, and I'm going to find a little reach, and then come back down again. And try not to smash your elbow into the floor like I just did. And then you can find the other side, finding that long cross across the midline, and then easing your way back into the floor. And I'm using the opposite hand to support me. I'm not trying to come down only thinking of abdominal muscles, right? I'm using a pull in space to help me. So there's diagonal reaching here, and then I come back down again. We'll do these, do those a few times. And then we'll go a diagonal sit up, and then we'll take a little spin around to reach in the opposite diagonal. And then from my lower body, my leg is going to start, and my upper body will follow. Hand leads, scanning around the horizon, taking a reach, and here I'm definitely, that little lateral pelvic shift is happening here as I roll onto my front surface, and then my leg will take over, so my lower body will lead here with the right leg, unwinding into, and that might feel more like a body half, right, because you've got the same side unwinding, but then you have this underside that's also part of the expression. So onto the floor in a big X, and we'll build up to that little sequence. Starting by rocking one heel, sending the information through the diagonal of your body to the opposite shoulder blade, maybe to the opposite hand. And it will be helpful not to have the legs too wide. And it might be useful to still have the center of the heel on the ground as you take the rock, rather than having the leg entirely externally rotated. Just based on the information that, like how the head of the femur, how the thigh is speaking to the pelvis, to the acetabulum. So you can explore for yourself a little bit narrower, a little bit wider. And you've still got the head nodding underneath. And then you can switch to the other side when you're ready. Noticing what you notice here about this heel rock now organizing lower to upper through this cross-lateral connection. And you can switch back to the first diagonal. And it's not like the one that's not active disappears entirely. It's more there underneath, let's say. So the active one can be more in the foreground, and the other one is there as a sort of ongoing support, as I was mentioning about core to periphery, to this radial symmetry idea that everything's involved all the time, can be perceived to be involved. Great. And when you've had enough rocking on those diagonals, which you could probably do for another 10 minutes and learn lots of things about, but here's a teaser for yourself so you can go and explore it in your own time. Let's add on now a sense of upper initiation. I'm going to take my fingertips of the right hand, peeling my arm close to my midline. Keep following that hand with my eyes to see where it's going in space. And then I'm going to reverse that journey back down to the ground. And then peeling my hand across my midline, seeing my hand, finding this journey in space, and then undoing. And if you're doing this holding your breath, I suggest trying exhaling. Give yourself some breath support and oxygen on the way. Lovely. And try to bring your head with you as soon as possible, so you're not kind of the hand goes and you're like peeling your head off the ground. Sense of really seeing the hand, drawing yourself up. And you can use that other hand for support as well. And as you come up, you're not tipping onto that side, you're trying to stay actually fairly passive in the lower body. Okay. Hand leads, scanning around the horizon, finding a reach across you. And then the leg begins, the heel finds the ground first, side of pelvis, and then the arm unwinds. And you can see that hand to cross, to find this level change, to sit, scanning around the horizon to find a reach across yourself back to where you were lying. And then here you have to find a moment of adjusting so your arm can come underneath you. And then this leg's going to lead, both legs stay in contact with the ground, the lower leads and then the upper follows. Have a little explore of that. If you're not quite sure what happens here when you're on the ground in this deep spiral, you need to get this arm underneath you so it's ready to roll onto. If it's already on this side, it's going to be quite uncomfortable for your shoulder, so it might go underneath your waist, it might go underneath your head even. But again, we're finding this upper-lower rotation, but this time with the opposite arm more active. And then when you've evened up right and left, let's go into this position with the knees in the supine hook. And let's take the knees, so feet staying planted on the ground. Let's carry the knees over to one side and see the hand in the opposite direction. And then exhaling, bringing the pelvis to the middle, head and tail unwind, knees come back up. So this is more of the classic knee drop or diagonal knee reach Bartenieff fundamental exercise. And we kind of prepared the connections for it with the previous actions. Lower body leading, spine rotating towards the opposite hand. And again, let's slow it down. Feeling that traveling, with the connection traveling from the lower through to the upper, through the spiraling of the spine. And the next time you're back in the center, let's all go to the right side. And then see the left hand and trace some circles over your head. And this arm circles across your body, seeing the hand. And the head can stay on the ground, or it can also come up a little off the ground at this point, and then back down again. So activating more of the upper body here with this spiral relationship to the lower. When you've done a few circles in one direction, you can reverse the circle. Now, with this arm circle, I could easily roll more onto my right side as I take that circle, which would make it more of a body half action. But I'm trying for this time to keep my lower body really stable and find that reach more in my upper body through my thoracic spine. You can try both. They're both quite interesting to explore what that kind of little shift across pelvis feels like. And then what happens when you stabilize more in the lower body and find more of the rib cage reaching. And then let's find an end to that side. Bring the pelvis back to the middle. Knee drop to the other side to see the right hand. And again, taking some arm circles here. And so eyes can be open, following your hand. You might find exhaling as you find the arm towards the opposite hand helps this sense of reaching and enclosing, of narrowing. Carving the air around you. Reversing the circle when you like. And again, it's up to you whether you keep your head on the ground or not. It could be interesting to explore it. If it feels like it's very straining, don't bother. And also being clear for yourself whether you're taking more of a body half arm circle with more of a roll across the ilia, or whether you're keeping the pelvis more stable as the upper body does more of that reach. So it's more of a rib cage, scapular engagement, which could still be happening when you roll as a body half roll here. But the spine is staying more in one unit. Whereas if you keep your lower body stable and find a little reach across yourself, you're finding more of this differentiation of the spine. Okay, lovely. Next time you take an arm circle, carry on circling, bringing the other arm in. So you're more on your body half as we were earlier. Carry on that circle to sit. And then you can find yourself back into the ground. So here I was, knee drop, arm circle, carry on my arm circle, and I can push the underside, and then I can find a body half, easing myself back into the floor. So knee drop, taking me into an arm circle, pushing myself to sit, and then reversing back into the floor. Knee drop, arm circle, knee, return from knee drop. That might be enough, but if you want to take it into some more variations, knee drop, arm circle, or maybe the other arm can circle, find another knee drop, or find an arm circle here. Where else can I go? Lower body leading, upper body following. Lower body leading, upper body following. Playing with this relationship of the knees traveling in one direction, sending a spiral through your spine that maybe comes into the shoulder blades, or maybe the arms lead. Head can go in the same direction, in the opposite direction. Playing with this connection here, a spiral through the spine that might be initiated from the knees traveling in the same direction, or from an arm circling, eyes and head following. Where does that want to take you? And taking it into your own movements now. We have a pattern of knee drop and arm circle, a little level change, pushing your way out of the ground. Maybe you find it in the body half configuration, maybe in the lower body, upper body configuration. So your game with yourself is to find moments of level change using your connectivity. And you might find some things that feel very familiar, or you might absolutely surprise yourself by not knowing where you're going or what patterns of connection you are using, and that's also fine. And I invite you to keep remembering this thing of hands coming towards your navel center, so coming close to yourself and a little bit further away, as a way of finding kind of an exertion recuperation rhythm of you and the space, you with the space, and the space with you. So it's not an entirely internal sensing eyes closed world, but a sensing world with this connection of the space around you. And again, you might take it off into a tempo that's much more vigorous. You might be taking it really small and with a very considered, slower tempo. You might be finding whatever your body's calling for in this moment, but take another 2 minutes of exploration. And if you feel like you need to do more pushing from the upper or pushing from the lower, to kind of bring it back down to something a little bit more simple, absolutely feel free. And remembering this sense of breath support as an initiation for movement. Remembering this weight support, activating the weight of your body into the ground, a little push, a little rock. A lot of this is very much connected to the fluidity of your body. It's kind of ongoingness of one pattern into the next, But of course, feel free to give yourself a pause at any moment. And eventually find walking, but take your time to get there. Don't just stop what you're doing and jump up and walk. See if you can find a progression of what you're doing out of the ground, eventually to 2 feet, but take a minute or so to get there. And it's not necessarily going to happen in one pop. It might be more tidal. It might be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's totally great. And if you find walking, notice what you notice of your connectivity in walking. And walking might become something else, and that's fine. Feeling the underlying radial symmetry of navel center in 6 directions towards head, tail, hands and feet. Underlying head-tail connection, especially in walking of heels, sending this information through pelvis into skull with every step. And you have this lower body locomoting, upper body free. And stepping right to left with this subtle rotation of spine in between. And before you carry on walking through your evening or end of the day, let's gather at the computer for a couple of moments of any questions or reflections. So we were exploring upper, lower, body half, cross-lateral in different kinds of ways. That was the theme in order to get us off the ground and back into the ground and eventually traveling. So I saw all of those things. So great.